The question, how do we know what we know, is a really big question that many philosophers tried to set out to understand and answer, but it proved to be very difficult. Descartes, Hume, and Kant, as were all studied, they were they gave it their best shot, and only Kant was really able to come up with a more certain answer. And Descartes and Hume, while giving it their best shot, they were not able to come up with an answer that could be proven or could be knowledgeable with more than just 99% certainty. While Kant may have taken more means to say, how do we know what we know, how to answer how do we know what we know, but in more of a this is what we don't know kind of way, his answer was more definite and more understandable and less still up to be figured out like Kant or like Hume and Descartes' answers were. How Descartes went about it was he the only thing that he ended up really proving was that that he knows himself to be a thinking thing, and that was really all that he was able to finalize and say with 100% certainty, that that was all that he knew. One of the ways that he tried to go about it was saying that if you knew that there was no evil deceiver, then you would be able to know that all of your knowledge is correct and that you weren't just making up things that were put in your mind by the evil deceiver. And he tried to go about that, and later on used the example of God with the existence of God there being no evil deceiver. He tried to say that God would, with the existence of God, there would be no evil deceiver, so therefore all knowledge would be true, and then everything you know is good and right and true. But in Descartes' trying to prove the existence of God, he never ended up coming up with a definite, certain answer for the existence of God. So therefore, his evil deceiver, the existence of God and no evil deceiver equaling true knowledge, didn't end up being rational because he did not prove the existence of God. Hume, the way that Hume went about it was he had multiple different ways that he looked at not the existence of God, the way that he looked at how we know what we know, and he made lots of arguments about cause and effect. He did realize eventually that cause and effect is nowhere near certain, and that cause is metaphysical, and that it's not something that we already know, because cause is inferred and it's not set in stone. While one thing might cause another thing and it might happen repeatedly, that doesn't mean that everything is going to have a cause and an effect that will be certain every single time. So that is not able to be proven that that was 100% certain. He did go about to say that custom and habit were ways that you could prove, like, cause and effect is like a custom or a habit, but with cause or with a custom and with a habit, that's solely a belief. If you get used to doing something, or if something happens over and over again, that's not necessarily saying that something different will happen at a different time, or something different won't happen at a different time, because it is very still up in the air that anything can happen and that there is no definite set answer to one certain thing happening. And the belief of something happening afterwards is nowhere near knowledge. It's that is not 100% certain. So this try to answer from Hume does not prove how we know what we know. But so Kant delves into the idea of space and time, and he ends up realizing space and time does exist. And so if space and time does exist, then we know what we know is what we can conceptualize. Because space and time does exist, if we conceptualize something, then we know that. He says that math and science is a priori because it is set in stone. For humans, the way that we do math and the way that we do science is set in stone. There's no way to do it differently, because he uses the example 7 plus 5 is equal to 12. And there's no other way that we would do math like that. Like, we wouldn't say 7 plus 5 is equal to 2. That is nothing that we would consider. And while I was reading this, I was slightly confused because at first it wasn't, at first he didn't clarify the whole for humans aspect. And so it makes it slightly confusing because, well, how is math what math is? How did someone come up with the number 7? How did someone come up with the number 5? And how did someone come up with the fact that that would then equal 12? But later on, it's like, if there was some other type of species out there that had knowledge or thinking minds like we do, they would probably have a different type of math. And so it's not to say that our math is the only math and that math is certain and math is exactly what we have as math, but it's to say that math can be the math that we have is what we know, and it is true because that is how humans do math. But if there were another species that could do math, they would very likely have a completely different concept of math that they can use, and they can properly get the correct answers for. And every problem that we have in math, we can solve. Every problem that they have in math, they would be able to solve. And so it would be two completely different things, but it would be known because it is certain in the way that we have conceptualized how math works, and it'll be certain in the way that they conceptualize that math works. Kant also talked about metaphysics and how it's really difficult to prove metaphysics, and there's there's no real reason for metaphysics. To give a solid reason for metaphysics is really difficult. But he did talk about how metaphysics was synthetic a priori, and that means that it's intuition based, and it is true, but it's just too difficult to really not understand, because metaphysics makes sense, but it's difficult, and it's empirical. It's not empirical. Metaphysics is not empirical. It's based completely on not pure logic. It is based purely on logic, and it's not based on observation or experience. Metaphysics holds true, and there's nothing about metaphysics that would say that it isn't true. And so Kant really, how we know what we know, he proves by saying that specifically, well, in the math and science example, we humans have knowledge that we have created, or that has been created, that we can follow, and that is ours to understand, and that there's no changing that, and that there are certain things that are true, and that are a priori, that can be set in stone and can't change, just like math and science. And I think that is definitely one of the biggest examples that Kant uses to prove that we know what we know.